In the 1980s, I visited my Smith grandparents in Savannah during a break from university. We went out for lunch one day when we were served our meal by an African American woman. I could tell that my very racist grandmother was on edge because she hated any interaction with Black people. After the server brought out our lunch, my grandfather requested horseradish. After the server made two attempts to satisfy him with both horseradish sauce and then chopped horseradish, I asked my grandfather if he meant tartar sauce, and he affirmed that was what he meant. And the server brought him the tartar sauce. I suspect then that my grandfather had some early stages of dementia. And each time that the server came to the table, I could sense my grandmother's tension building silently. She despised African American people, in which she was offended that she had to speak to one. When our check was brought out, I noticed that my grandmother was not leaving a tip on the table for the server. Remember that the server had spent an enormous amount of time and effort trying to please my grandfather. My grandmother was not going to give money to a Black person. As we were leaving, I went to the restroom. I had hoped when I came out that I could furtively slip the server a tip. But when I opened the door, my grandmother was waiting for me. I suspect that she fathomed my plans and I was thwarted. My grandparents were typical Southerners of their generation, both having grown up in rural South Carolina in the 1920s and 30s. My grandmother Smith was one of the most racist people I have ever known. During my childhood, she was also the only person who I knew loved me. Her hatred of African Americans is beyond my ability to convey to you this morning. It was a fundamental belief like her Southern Baptist faith. It could not be changed or discussed. She died in my first year in seminary, training for the Unitarian Universalist ministry. I am sure that she thought that I was going to hell. As we have learned from our recent election cycle, there are other people who are not totally unlike my grandmother in their attitudes. And today, we're going to reflect upon the official commemoration of Martin Luther King's birthday tomorrow. It is a time when we remember his life and the continuing struggle against racism and oppression in this country. For some, this is a time dedicated to service projects. For others, it is a time to support anti-oppression work by donating money to worthy causes and working with others for systemic change. It also can be a time of celebration for the gains that African Americans have experienced due to the improvements from the civil rights movement. Tomorrow also marks the inauguration of a man who has referred to non-white people, especially Latino immigrants, as vermin. This is a time of fear for many of us. It is a time that we need to consider how we can use the privilege that many of us have to advocate for those groups of people who are at risk from government oppression. This is a time that tests our character. In his I Have a Dream speech in 1963, just months after I was born, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." It seems so self-evident what King meant, but then learned people started talking about it after his death and found that they could not agree upon what character meant in that line. It seems to me that King was drawing upon a Unitarian Universalist source for this. He did that quite often, actually. Years ago, Coretta Scott King, King's widow, worked on a publication with Rosemary Bray McNatt. who is now a Unitarian Universalist minister and the president of one of our seminaries, the Star King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, California. Coretta Scott King told McNatt that Martin Luther King Jr. seriously considered becoming a Unitarian minister, but decided to stay in the faith that would empower better the direction of his ministry. The evidence for this is found in one of King's most famous quotes. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." President Obama liked the quote so much that he had the quote placed in a custom-made carpet in front of his desk in the Oval Office when he was president. King never gave attribution to this statement, but Unitarian Universalist ministers knew that he was paraphrasing something that Theodore Parker, a renowned 19th century Unitarian minister and ardent abolitionist, wrote. Theodore Parker is somewhat obscure for the most part, and paraphrasing his statement reveals that King was deep diving into Unitarian history. He was taking seriously our religious tradition. King also studied Henry David Thoreau, who was not officially a Unitarian, but attended Unitarian churches for most of his life. Thoreau was not going to join anything. As King studied Parker and Thoreau, it is not a stretch to speculate that he probably read Ralph Waldo Emerson as well, as those three writers are often joined together by Unitarian Universalists. Emerson wrote a long essay entitled On Character. Emerson's work influenced American thought in the 19th century, especially Unitarian thought. Unitarians drew from Emerson's thought, and the development of character became an important aspect of what it meant to be Unitarian then. I believe that Emerson's notions of character is what King was referring to. I also believe that Emerson's ideal of character is important as it gives direction to our own thoughts and deeds during these unsettling days. We need to think about how we are thinking. In our times, we might be swayed by thoughts based upon irrational fears and unfocused on long-term goals. Destabilizing us is one of the ways the media instills fear into us. Emerson reminded us, though, that we need to accept that things will change and that character means acknowledging that, while still retaining grounding in general principles. He wrote, and it's always difficult to quote Emerson because his words, every sentence is so packed that it takes a reread 2 or 3 times to grasp what he is saying in each sentence. But I will give this to you anyway. Emerson wrote, "In nature, every moment is new. The past is always swallowed and forgotten. Nothing is secure but life, transition, the energizing spirit. No love can be bound by oath or covenant to secure it against a higher love. No truth so sublime, but it may be trivial tomorrow in the light of new thoughts. People wish to be settled. Only as far as they are unsettled is there any hope for them. Life is a series of surprises." I believe that Emerson is telling us that change will always happen. We should expect it and not be totally afraid of the changes that happen. Emerson is resolute, though, that accepting change does not mean that a person does not hold fast to principles. He argues that true character is a deep intrinsic quality that shines through a person's actions, remaining consistent even when faced with challenges, and is more valuable than mere talent or outward appearances. It is a force that guides a person from within. A person's character is lived through actions that demonstrate inner convictions. In a sense, this tells us that our character may be examined by who we are and what we do more than the values that we proclaim. One of the issues that I have with current anti-oppression efforts is they do not promote understanding of character in this way. In their view, one is privileged or oppressed. People are revealed only in the context of stereotypes about the way people like them are. Every human being, I believe, should be encountered not as a label, but as a unique person. Tell me not about your social position and inform stereotypes about people from your background. Instead, tell me who you are and what you do. Tell me about how you live your life. Tell me about your view of the world around you and your dreams of making it different for everyone. Emerson also tells us that character emanates from within a person. It is a quality that influences decisions and actions without needing external validation. You do not need an attagirl from anyone because your inner voice knows what you did was the right thing. People of character work for causes that are important to them, and not because they need recognition or praise. Someone with character may find it difficult to deal with compliments about their actions because that person just did things that they were supposed to be the way they were supposed to be done ethically. Emerson goes on about talent also. Talent for him is ability. He is unimpressed with a person's abilities compared to a person's moral compass. This is in contrast with our current value system that emphasizes skills over values. Character, to Emerson, is more impactful and lasting than qualities that are only useful for the moment. Character is more worthy than ability. This makes me think about the billionaire oligarchs who are about to be given greater power than ever before in our nation's history. They are men whose talent has amassed massive wealth, but they did so sometimes by harming others for their own gain. They have amazing ability, but many of them are without conscience at all. They lack the essential aspect of character. One of the aspects of character is that people who have it often inspire and influence others by their presence and integrity. They often lead by example. They sometimes convince others to do something just by doing it themselves. We saw that in the work that President Carter did for Habitat for Humanity. He did not talk at length about building homes for the homeless. Instead, he picked up a hammer. And his example calls millions of people to do the same. Emerson warns us against mistaking outward displays of virtue or social approval for character. True character is revealed in consistent behavior and in difficult situations. Having character, though Emerson does not mention it, has to include the ability to acknowledge one's own mistakes. Character is also the capacity to admit that one was wrong or that one failed, and to do so willing to face any consequences for that. This is one of the most difficult aspects of character because we want to be heroic in our own imaginations, to be the person who is always right. It takes the integrity to face the reality that we aren't always right, that we make mistakes. One has to let go of pride and vanity and tell the truth. One has to review and perhaps revise one's inner principles. One admits one's failings. Heather Cox Richardson mentioned in her letter for Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday 2 years ago an act of this kind, and it has always stayed with me since I read it. On the night before the D-Day invasion, when the Allied forces, the United States and Britain and others, stormed the beaches of Normandy to liberate Europe from Nazi tyranny and horror, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the night before the D-Day invasion, sat down and wrote a letter praising the troops and taking all the blame for the next day's failure in case things went wrong. That took integrity and it took character. It's a very moving thing. So why talk about character today? Martin Luther King Jr. possessed these traits that Emerson described. So do all of us, I believe, have some of the traits of character, and we need to cultivate them more in ourselves and in others. We need to face the fact that change is inevitable, but our grounded principles are not. We need to find our inner voice that provides a moral compass for us. Our society needs people who serve strongly held ideas like democracy, equality, justice, and just simply kindness to each other. We need to be more impressed by someone's values than by their abilities alone. We need to remember that actions speak louder than words. We need to admit it when we are at fault. Martin Luther King Jr. lived up to all these ideals about character. He hoped that his children would be judged by their character rather than their complexion. He longed for a world where justice would roll down like manna from heaven. In 1966, King decided to broaden his efforts from racial equality to economic justice. He recognized that people of all races needed to come together for a brighter future for everyone. Though African Americans are disproportionately poor compared to white people in the United States, the numbers of white people living in poverty in this country outnumber any other racial or ethnic category. This reality is absent from the political speech in our country because, were it acknowledged, it might create a sense of solidarity between groups that are still divided. We talk about white privilege sometimes in anti-oppression work. Yes, some people have it. I suppose that some, if we were just judged by our appearance, might be. But tell people working 3 jobs with no health and insurance coverage, scrounging for food and living day to day with little sleep, that they have white privilege. We are at the cusp of a difficult time for people who hope for a better day for everyone. The days to come will challenge us to rise to the occasion. We will need to examine the content of our own character and keep together and find hope together. Someday a land will be built in this place and all the world where justice and kindness will prevail. In our time, we might aspire to have the character to make that dream a reality. May that spirit of life that is in all make us strong together in this journey. So be it. Blessed be. Amen.